I am talking to Kyle Racki today. He's the co-founder and CEO of Proposify, a multi-million-dollar SaaS company that helps to revolutionize the sales proposal process. He also wrote a book recently called Trials and Tribulations: How to Build a Business While Getting Punched in the Mouth. So we're going to chat to Kyle here how he built a multi-million-dollar SaaS business from scratch and more. So Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
I think a great starting point maybe would be for you to go a bit over your background. I think you have a very unusual background, actually, and not one of maybe what you would think a SaaS entrepreneur would have.
Yeah, that's right. I don't necessarily fit the mold other than being a white male. That's about the only commonality.
That's good enough, yeah, to go.
Which I'm not saying is a good thing. I think there should be more diverse, but I digress. That's another topic. My background, so I'm a designer by trade. That's what I went to school to do, study graphic design, and then in the kind of the mid 2000s got into web design and taught myself coding. Worked at agencies, and around 2008 is when I went out on my own as a freelancer. I was only about 23, 24 years old. And then shortly after that, about a year of freelancing, I invited a friend of mine who I met at an agency named Kevin Springer to be a co-founder with me. And we started an agency together called Headspace, which we didn't turn into a meditation app. That was somebody else. But Headspace was a web design agency. We did marketing, and it was a very small business, about 10 people. Did that for about 5 years, and it actually learned a lot of valuable business lessons from the mistakes that we made. We made a ton of mistakes. And then over the course of time, we were able to get a couple of SaaS products launched, most of which failed or we just discontinued. But the one that kind of stuck was proposal software. And so we named it Proposify. We sold off our agency and we went full time into it in about 2014. And then about maybe a year later, found some traction, started to scale. And now we're here at 8,000 plus customers, just over 6 million in annual recurring revenue, and a team of about 65 people.
That's amazing. So what made you start building SaaS products when you were running the agency?
I've always been drawn to web applications. I think the first one that really got me excited was Basecamp when the original Basecamp Classic came out. We had started using that in the agencies I worked at, and then later I used it as a freelancer and at my agency. And I remember one of the first tasks that I had as a junior designer in my first agency job was actually working on a proposal. We were using InDesign, and I remember it just being a very chaotic experience. We had account managers who were trying to get proposals out the door, so they would get junior designer Kyle to lay them out and make them look good and find case studies. Back then, there was no Dropbox. We might have had a shared server, but a lot of our files were actually on CDs or DVDs that I had to go and try to find and pull files off of. And then getting emailed Word documents and that kind of thing. So I just remember it being a really chaotic, messy experience, and Basecamp was new. And I just thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was like a Basecamp, but for proposals, which I thought was maybe a dumb idea. Maybe nobody would like that, but it was just sort of a fun little side project that I started designing kind of in my basement one night, and then literally sat on it for years. And so it wasn't until later that we were running the agency and we were having a lot of trouble that many agency owners have, which is cash flow and long sales cycles, waiting to get paid, projects going over budget, like very classic problems that a lot of service businesses have. And we just looked at the SaaS model as like, oh, wouldn't it be great to have recurring revenue coming in the door and just know how much revenue you'll have next month. So that was really what spurred us on. Also, Kevin has a product background. He actually ran a coffee company in Florida back in the 90s that he sold online through e-commerce. We were both just had our head into product. I like UI and UX design, so I liked the challenge of building some very utilitarian kind of, not a pretty brochure website, but an actual application that people use. That always excited me. So that was kind of what got us into products.
And were you solving your own pain point at the time? Like you wanted to have better sales proposal, or just you thought it's an idea which will catch up?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I think that was probably one of our keys to success, and probably for listeners out there who are thinking of product ideas, is usually solving the problem that you have yourself is the best kind of product to build. Trying to anticipate what other people or other industries have and trying to build something to solve a problem you don't personally have is actually really difficult. So that was kind of where we were at. Was we were using, even when it was my own agency, we were still using InDesign. We had to train our account managers on how to use it because I didn't want a boring looking kind of Word document for proposals. We were a design company, so design was very important to me. And our proposals had to look as stunning as the actual designs we delivered to our clients. So the problem with InDesign, of course, is that it's very complicated and, hard to share files, hard to collaborate. So it was kind of like that solution. Wouldn't it be great if we had it all in the browser? It's kind of like InDesign, but it had all of the sort of workflow improvements that InDesign doesn't have, but it's made specifically for proposals.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk maybe a bit more about the early evolution of the product? I mean, there's usually nothing like a straight path, like maybe the evolution which kind of maybe got you into a place of product market fit where you really built something your customers really wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love talking about that. So we actually struggled with, sometimes people look at where you're at now and they assume that it all happened quite quickly.
Totally,
I liken it to like bands that have been playing for, a decade in strip malls and Chinese restaurants. And then they finally make it big and people go, oh, well, that was an overnight success. So we were kind of like that. I mean, when we launched version 1 of the product, it was essentially crickets. Like we did get a few people sign up and try it out, and most of them bounced. Most of them didn't come back. And it actually took, if you count from when we launched the official sort of version 1 to when we started actually hitting product market fit, it was about 17 months, almost a year and a half.
Oh, wow. Until first paying customers, you mean?
Well, we did have paying customers, but I mean, we're talking like 10 customers paying $20 a month. And then we would get a new one. We would always celebrate when we got a new customer, and then we would lose 2. So that was the general, week to week, month to month, that was what was going on. It wasn't until, so there was a few things there. One was, I think we had the initial idea. The idea was good. The problem we were trying to solve was correct. It was just the way that we were going about solving it wasn't. We had a very, and I designed it, so I can say it was a very poorly designed UI. It was a lot of assumptions I was making about how people might use it or what they would want to use. And really the only advice there is you kind of have to put out something ugly and clunky that doesn't work just to get feedback on what exactly doesn't work so you can fix it. So it was a lot of gradual iteration. Rapidly, we were, putting something out there, talking to people, figuring out what wasn't working and then improving upon it. So it was kind of like, that was one of the main ways that we started hitting product market fit, but it was a long process. In terms of like features, there were 2 features in particular that I actually didn't think that most customers would want, but they proved me wrong by wanting it. Mm-hmm. One was online signatures, believe it or not. Back in those days, about, maybe even 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, the market for online signatures wasn't as big as it is now. And so like when we were running an agency and selling to, large government clients, I couldn't envision any of them like clicking a link in an email and then using an online signature and that being it. Like they all still kind of wanted printed copies signed in ink and then faxed over. So I never even envisioned there would be online signatures, but the market wanted it. They all asked for it. And then we had a couple competitors that started offering it. So that was one of the things we decided we were going to do. The other one was just simplifying the way people use templates. So we kind of had some version of a template system in the first version, but it was really complicated. And really, it wasn't until we basically said, like, I think I sat down for a week and just designed about 10 different templates and made them as beautiful as I could make them. And then we had like kind of a new template editor that made it easier to just pick a template, copy it and go. And those 2 things together really were, I'd say, the catalyst. We went from like 10 customers to 20 the next month, and then 20 to 40, and then 40 to 80. Like we just started doubling month after month around that time.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the things you were doing before this, like during those 17 months, which helped you build those features? Were you like doing any process? Like what were some of the things which you gradually start doing, which led you maybe to this point where you knew I need to build this and then the customers would really love it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really tough 17 months, especially because we were still running the agency and we were actually trying to sell it and get out of the agency business. So I think actually if we would have had more time to dedicate to Proposify, we probably would have hit product market fit faster. We did have a developer named Jonathan, who's our CTO, who we had hired him just to build Proposify. He wasn't doing any agency work, so his time was 100% focused. But the founders, Kevin and myself, weren't. So in the midst of trying to run the agency, sell it, we were also, I was taking time out of every day to answer support emails, look at some analytics, design out some new screens, like talk to customers on the phone, that kind of thing. But it wasn't until we really went full time into it, which was around May of 2014. That was such an important time between May, June, July until September, those 5 months. It was just the three of us head down focused on Proposify day in, day out, talking to customers, fixing bugs, fixing screens, brainstorming new ways to solve the problem better. It was those that head down focused time that really helped us.
Mm-hmm. Do you think going all in on Proposify at the time is what really made a difference versus doing it as a part-time thing or maybe 60, 70% of your mental energy?
100%. I think that it's extremely difficult to bootstrap a product as a side hustle. It is the way most of them start. They kind of have to, but there's a lot of agency businesses out there in particular that they all want to have a SaaS product, but they think that they can just build it on the side and eventually it'll just somehow magically take off and then they can gradually reduce the amount of service work they take on. That's kind of the dream of every service provider. In actual practice, it's really difficult. And at some point, you have to, I usually say you have to shit or get off the pot,
Okay. And what kept you going in those 17 months? Because it's a relatively long time. And I know a lot of people listening in, sometimes you start something after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe something isn't going your way and people just move on, or even a year, they don't see results and they quit. So what kind of maybe kept you going on this project for 17 months, which is almost a year and a half?
Yeah, it's sort of, I think it's something that we always thought, and I think most people out there thought, is that once you start doing something, it starts to work and it just kind of gradually grows every month. But in actual practice, usually there's a long flat period that you have to get through. And then everything that you're doing is it has a compounding effect. So it's kind of like, when you hear about people talk about like weight loss habits, right? Like they might be starting to change their activities. They might start walking more, start, sleeping better, eating less, drinking more water. And that might not have an effect right away, but eventually it's sort of, there's kind of that tipping point where everything all the habits you've built over time start to actually show. So it's not wasted time. The first part isn't wasted. And it's kind of like that with a product, I think. Everything you're doing in the beginning will take effect and show over time, but
later on
through that tough period first.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Growth, and even after you're scaling, growth is usually never linear. Unless you're a rare company like a Slack or something like that. Most scaling companies have sort of flat months and then really, high growth months. And then they dip a little bit. Like growth is almost always a ladder and it's never just kind of a straight linear thing.
Do you think it's especially true for SaaS because of the recurring revenue model where it takes time to get the customers and the recurring revenue versus other business models?
I actually think SaaS is probably better in a lot of ways than most other business models. Because like if you run, say, a construction business or an agency or anything where they're typically one-time purchases or one-time projects, you always have to keep that pipeline of sales full, because as soon as you're done that project for that client, you need to now replace that revenue. And if you want to grow, you need to not only replace the revenue that you're now not getting from that one customer, you now need to get 2 customers or a bigger project or more projects from the same customer, but you basically have to replace your revenue. SaaS is different because it's recurring revenue. So generally, unless you're losing a lot of customers to churn, you can keep the same amount of customers and just keep growing and adding more on top. Now, you're still going to have months where maybe growth hasn't dipped and gone into the negatives, but it's not at, 10%. It's like 5 or 2 or 1.
Got it. So what were some of the challenges you started hitting maybe after 17 months? So let's say you did start having product market fit, which is a great place. Customers start coming in, they start using your product. What are some of the challenges you started hitting at that period of time?
I look back on that time very positively because it was very exciting. We all kind of thought, like we were working on it, but we had a runway of money was going to run out in say 6 months. And honestly, I worked my ass off so that we wouldn't, but at the same time, I kind of had a backup plan in my mind, right? Like,
what was the backup plan?
probably just get a job. It's just go
Okay.
work at some local company. But I wasn't 100% sure this was going to work, and so when it finally did, it was kind of like, oh wow, didn't expect that. So I remember that time being very, it was just a really fun and exciting time because there were still kind of 3 or 4 of us at the company. Now we had the challenge of, okay, revenue's starting to grow. We're getting to the point where we don't have to worry about running out of money. Now, how do we scale this thing? Do we raise money? Do we, who's the next hire going to be? Who do we really need on the team? And so that sort of organic bootstrapping scaled. That was sort of the next step and the next challenge of, now we have to build that first 10 people at your startup are like the most important hires because they really define the culture for years afterwards.
So you think that the first people you hired are still the same culture you have right now when you believe you're over 60 people? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, some of that first 10 people aren't here anymore. But the rest who are still here are on the leadership team. They're generally running a department, whether it's marketing, product, engineering, that kind of thing. So they've been the ones there from very early on and have helped, us figure out what our core values are. They've hired a lot of the people in the company. So, a lot of that culture kind of bleeds out from those people.
Got it. I want to stress one thing you mentioned, the fact you had a backup plan, and the worst case thing is you would get a job, because I think many people are fearful of jumping into something. But if you really think about it, the worst case which can happen is you just go and work somewhere for a certain time just to pay the bills. And it seems like you've had it as well, which allowed you to leap into Proposify.
People, I think, often put way too much emphasis on risk, the risk of being an entrepreneur. This is kind of a key point early on in my book, which is that really entrepreneurship is not that risky. If you're taking out, loans and maybe putting your house up as collateral or something, okay, there's some risk there. But generally speaking, if you're going to go out on your own and become a freelancer, you kind of eat what you kill. If you go out and get a client, they pay you, and now you can pay your rent. If not, if you're really not good at it, you don't have any money and now you have to go find a job. So like, there's always a backup plan. Even in a lot of startups, you raise money from, if you do raise money from, say, venture capitalists, it's their money, really. There's risk in terms of, you might destroy some relationships and lose their trust, but ultimately you take their money, you do everything you can to make it work. But if it doesn't work out, they're out the money and
You're still alive, you're going to eat. Yeah.
There's almost always sort of a safety net in a lot of this stuff. So I think a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs place way too much. They get way too stressed out about the risk. When you really look at it, it's not any more risky than just taking a job somewhere that you might get fired.
Do you still do the same things on the same belief? Meaning, do you still maybe grow Proposify through more aggressive means, knowing there's really nothing to lose, or you kind of change your opinion once the company is in a later stage?
I mean, there's always going to be stressful times. Typically when you're, when you're in a position where you're raising money or you've raised money and now you're not hitting targets and you've got a board to answer to, those are stressful times. If you've got to lay people off or fire people, that's because of not hitting targets or because they're not able to perform to the level you need. I mean, those are stressful times and they're not fun, but at the same time, everybody will survive this. They all, it passes, you figure it out or you don't. And ultimately Kevin always has this expression of like, they can't take away your birthday, like you're still alive, nobody died.
Yeah, no tiger is gonna eat the entrepreneur if
Yeah,
the company is gonna fail. In the book, you mentioned that later you did actually end up raising money, and I think the deal you made was very, very interesting. Not something that you see a lot right now, at least not something you read a lot. Can you talk about it and describe kind of what led to it and what deal you ended up doing when you did raise money?
Yeah, the common path for a lot of SaaS and startup entrepreneurs is to raise money from investors, usually venture capitalists, sometimes growth equity, and sometimes angels or super angels, that kind of thing. And by super angel, I mean like an angel investor who's just putting in money that's at the level that a venture capitalist would put in. The thing that Kevin and I never really liked about that model is it's essentially a gamble. You're going to convince some kind of VC to give you a couple $1,000,000 or whatever it is you're raising. And generally that puts you on a certain path, which is gradually you're losing control of your business. No VC will give you money without taking a board seat. So now they've got to say, they've actually got an active vote in the big decisions that you make as a company. And you, of course, lose a certain percentage of your ownership. So Kevin and I have always been very, very wary of that model. Because it's essentially a go big or stay home kind of move. It's like, okay, we're taking this money. We're going to, you can't just sit on that money. Like no VC will ever let you put that cash in the bank. So, the idea is that you've got to now spend aggressively to hit much higher growth targets. And if you don't hit it, there's a lot of consequences for that. It could mean you run out of money faster. You've got to make layoffs. You've got maybe the company has to get sold prematurely at a down round or a reduced valuation. And a lot of VCs will take preferred shares so they actually get paid first. And it's not uncommon for founders to walk away with nothing. So it's a very risky move to do that. And Kevin and I have always battled with that, right? Like, is it the right thing to do for the company? Is it the right thing for us as individuals? And so where we ended up landing was we read a post by the founders of Basecamp, and they had a deal, I think back around like the late, maybe like 2009, 2010, where they took money from Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos personally invested in Basecamp, but the idea was this isn't like traditional venture capital. He's actually just buying outright the shares from the founders, meaning they get a payout. I think they each made like $3 million, And the idea is like now Jeff Bezos owns some of Basecamp. He doesn't have a board seat. He has no controlling shares. And they basically got a mini acquisition because in their head, they were like, we don't want Basecamp to get acquired, but we want to basically have a payout now so we don't have to worry about money and be able to just ride out Basecamp and grow it for the next, 20, 30 years, if that's what it is. That was really appealing to Kevin and I, that whole idea. So it's actually what we set out to do was not quite exactly that deal. I think they actually got a really good deal that would have been hard for us to get, but somewhere in the middle, right? Like the investors can put money into the business to fuel growth, but also Kevin and I get to take what they call secondary capital, or chips off the table is another expression for it. And that was amazing. It wasn't as much as DHH and what's his name, Jason Fried got, but it was definitely enough for us to not have to worry, to be able to, build a house, put some money in investments, and just generally not what it does. And this is the pitch to investors is, a lot of them some of them don't think that founders should actually make a lot of money when they're running the company. They actually want them to, have the whip behind them, forcing them to grow. But it's actually not good to put that kind of pressure on founders. It makes them do stupid things like sell too early, for example. So being able to take secondary capital just means that now you can be in it for the long haul. You can turn down an acquisition offer if it's not the right offer, because you don't have that stress of needing this to work personally right now. Mm-hmm. That was basically the deal that we got.
How long was the go when you made a deal?
That was actually only just about over a year ago. So like early 2018. Mm-hmm. And our deal was a little different because basically the investors were fine with the secondary, but they wanted to put half up front and then half based on performance. So it was a pretty good deal for us because the initial round basically put 3 million on the balance sheet. Founders got secondary, and then based on hitting some aggressive targets, we would get the second half a year later.
Did you hit the targets,
No,
which you had in the middle?
we never hit
Okay.
the targets. So that the second part never ended up working out for us, but it was still worth it in the long run. We wish we had of, and they of course wish we had of, but it is what it is. We did it. We did what we could, and ultimately failed. So now it's just kind of moving on and trying to figure out what the next steps are.
So since you have this like 1 year to look back, did it really help you and Kevin, your co-founder, to clear off mentally and you're actually running and growing the business better because you maybe took some chips off the table?
Yeah, I think it definitely took a lot of stress away personally, enabled us to be able to think a lot more strategically and long-term about the business. And obviously the capital in the business helped us hire more and be able to build bigger departments and scale product and marketing and all those kind of things. So ultimately it was a great decision. We're glad we made it. And actually, yeah, I think it made us even hungrier and more. It definitely didn't make us complacent. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. One of the things which I noticed since I read your book as I was preparing and doing my homework is you said that having nothing is actually a superpower. And I think since we're talking about kind of the topic of risk mitigation with some VC funding, can you expand upon it? I think it was really interesting and valuable to anyone listening.
Yeah, I actually quoted Michael Scott from The American Office in the book because there was this great scene where Mike, played by Steve Carell, Michael Scott created this paper company to compete with Dunder Mifflin, and then Dunder Mifflin was looking to buy them out because the Michael Scott paper company was eating away at their business because they were just offering, paper for under what it was worth. They were losing money, and I remember in the negotiation between Michael Scott and I think David Wallace in the show, Steve Carell's character said something like, "We have nothing. Like if this doesn't work, we'll just start another company and another. Like I have no shortage of company names." And that was sort of reflected, I think, how I felt at the time, which was, we felt like our agency business wasn't worth anything at the time. Proposify wasn't worth anything, and if we ran out of money, then that's what it was, and we could just go find a job or do something. But ultimately, when you have nothing, I think people get way too protective. I actually think it's more dangerous when you have something because people are hedging their bets, and a lot of the decisions that they're making are about protecting what they have. And then there's very few people like maybe a Jeff Bezos or a Elon Musk who will just sort of, they don't worry about losing it all. They'll bet the farm. They'll bet every cent they have, especially Elon Musk. Most people are not like that. They're going to try to aggressively protect what they have. So sometimes it makes you make bad decisions. But if you have nothing, then you really can shoot for the fences and see what happens.
Do you think people who maybe get to a place of, let's say, selling their company for 1 million level, they get much more protective instead of going and building something bigger? They want to keep this money which we made from certain sale?
Absolutely. And it even happens at much bigger levels too. When we think of, how many companies can survive 100 years, right? Like
Not much. Very few, yeah.
Companies like Sears and Toys R Us and Blockbuster, these are all massive, massive billion-dollar corporations that have been around for decades. In case of Sears, early 20th century. And my phone thought I said, "Hey Siri."
Technology.
Yeah. And these are companies that wouldn't or couldn't adapt to the times, right? They didn't anticipate the internet, or if they did, they kind of buried their head in the sand. And that all, that happens. There's a book called The Innovators Dilemma, which is basically about that. It's about how once your company scales, it becomes a much slower engine, and in changing and adapting to markets and new technology and disruptive technology is extremely difficult. A lot of it comes from, this is the way we always did it. This is how we made our money. And, we're not changing it. And that's what actually kills you.
Is there anything else you do to protect yourself is the word I'll use from like maybe this mentality versus keeping the innovation and maybe really keeping doing the things which can really help most likely grow the company much more? Is there any habits, books, or anything kind of you're doing in order to keep yourself at this mentality?
I mean, it's always a challenge. I think I think your role changes as a founder or as a CEO once you're beginning to scale, which is say at our stage, we're still not a big company. We're under 10 million. We're not anywhere close to a Sears or a Blockbuster, but I think still in a much smaller way, you always have to be looking ahead at what's next. Where are we going? Where are we actually missing the boat? And it can come from looking at your competitors, looking at just sort of the habits and the behavior of your customers and other people in the market. What are the sort of the markets that are growing that you're a part of or you should be a part of? Should you be partnering with that company? Should you be trying to build it internally? Should you buy a company? It's all those kind of decisions that I think is really important for founders to take time out regularly to think about and trying to look long term. What ends up usually happening is founders are too bogged down in the weeds of the day-to-day of what they're doing. And a lot of times they chain themselves to their business. So they're just focused on executing every single day, making those sales calls or writing code or, whatever it is, they're just in the weeds of their business. And it's actually one of the most important skills for a new CEO to learn is how to hire the right people, how to delegate, and how to keep on top of what's going on in the business. But at the same time, set the vision, set the direction, and make sure that's communicated to the team. Setting vision and communicating it are actually the two hardest skills for a CEO, and one that a lot of them never figure out how to do right.
Do you think you figured out how to do it yourself at this stage where you are right now with Proposify?
I never think I'm good at anything, and that helps me. I think if I thought I was really good at it, I wouldn't be.
If you thought you would be good at it, you think you wouldn't like give the same shot or wouldn't try? That's what you mean?
I think when you say, "Oh, I'm really good at this thing," I don't know. For me personally, I think it sort of can make me complacent, or I think you always have to be punching above your weight a little bit. You always have to be challenging yourself to achieve more than what you've currently achieved. So to say I'm really good at setting vision and communicating it, I mean, I don't know. I try, and it's something I actively work on. Maybe I'm okay at it, but I think there's definitely room to improve.
Interesting. So were you able to get out of your day-to-day at the moment with Proposify, with the process you made?
Yes. I think one of the most important decisions that I made was hiring a business coach, which I did. His name's Dan Martell. So people in the SaaS world probably know who he is. He's actually from kind of the same area of Canada that I'm from, just a few hours away. And he's a great business coach. He got me on a lot of books and a lot of different systems that were helpful. One of them was called Traction by Gino Wickman.
That's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah. The whole entrepreneurial operating system, or EOS. That's a really helpful system because it sort of gives you a framework for running your business and making sure, you're communicating and understanding what's going on week to week. You have a scorecard, you're measuring what you're doing quarterly offsites. That whole process is really, really helpful. Having a vision traction organizer, which is just a document that spells all this stuff out. That was one of the most important things that we put into place about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And
the EOS implementation?
The EOS implementation, yeah.
Yeah, I'll link it to the show notes, by the way, anyone listening in.
Great. I think it's a lot of, there's really smart people out there who have written books about how to scale companies. And I think finding those books, getting the systems in place, and then adapting them kind of to your needs. We follow a number of different kind of frameworks, like Radical Candor was something I just read this year that we want to roll out. There's a whole bunch of them, but just anything that kind of creates that mentality that your business is like a machine. And your job as the founder isn't to become a cog in the machine. Your job is to run the machine and make sure it's running smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Right? Were there any other things which kind of help you run the machine smoothly besides the EOS implementation you mentioned?
like Dan always says, the job of a CEO is to set the vision and the direction, which, you know, covered a little bit of build the team, like get the right people in the door, hire, like hiring and pruning is sort of the second most important job. And the third one is don't run out of money, keep money in the bank.
Okay.
If you can do those three things, then you can do a good job as a CEO. So the idea is that those first 10 people or whoever you've hired in the meantime to run key departments is look at those, say 6 departments in your company. For a SaaS company, it's usually sales, customer success, product engineering, maybe operations and marketing, right? Like those are the biggest systems in the company. Those are like the 6 core things that run the machine. So you kind of look at each department individually, work with the heads of those departments, make sure that they've got a budget, that they're hitting their weekly metrics, like all of those things kind of help that system run. And if you do that well, then of course the heads of those departments have their own teams, and in some cases teams within teams or subsystems. So those departments can get very layered and have a lot to them, but ultimately you're just working with the head of the department to make sure, like, okay, what is the role of engineering? What is the role of marketing? Are they doing what they need to be doing?
Mm-hmm. So you're more acting like as a coach for your leaders and your team, which later on going to coach their departments.
Exactly. I think if you can be a good leader and a good manager for your direct reports, then you're basically leading by example and showing them how to do it for their reports, and that's how good culture sort of bleeds down through the org chart.
Got it. You mentioned you hired Dan Martell to be a coach. I'm actually interviewing him myself next week. But at which
a lot more energy than I have.
At which stage did you hire him, and how valuable was hiring Dan? I mean, do you think you would be where you are today without Dan or some coach by your side?
I mean, it's hard to say, but it was definitely a good decision. I think it was something that I didn't know he even really offered the coaching service. I know he was doing it. I think he was trying to figure it out around that time. He was doing some events and whatnot. But once I think he figured out his own coaching model. He's got different tiers of how he does it. Like SaaS Academy is kind of like his big group coaching that you sort of start at when you're at a certain level. Like I think when your SaaS business is around $1 million in ARR or over, you can join SaaS Academy. There's events and there's webinars. And so he's got a really good system behind it. I recently joined his kind of a top level coaching group called JFDI, which is just, I think, about 6 or 7 of us. And we get together at different cities once a quarter. Really valuable to learn from the group, and also just having kind of access to Dan to say like, hey, here's what I'm doing. What do you think? Or jumping on like a group phone call. All that stuff's been extremely valuable. And if you actually look at most founders or CEOs of big companies, if you look at like the Mark Zuckerbergs, I know I talked actually to Jeff Lawson, who's the CEO of Twilio, which is a big $1 billion, publicly traded SaaS company. He's had coaching to get to where he's at. So I think it's something that every CEO needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other coaches which you use besides Dan, or in general in your life?
Well, I mean, Dan's coaching is kind of like, it's very holistic, like it's not just work. I mean, this is I guess if we're talking about personal development, is that what you find about most CEOs at big companies is they usually start out fat and they get skinny, right?
What do you mean?
There's a reason for that, which is usually they've had coaching and they realize that in order to be a really good founder and to be able to operate at scale at the level that they need to be in a good mental space, and they need to have a good mindset. And in order to do that, they have to be healthy, right? Usually when you're at the early days of grinding and building your company, you're drinking diet soda, and you're staying up and you're not sleeping right, and you're just cramming fast food down your throat to stay alive. But that can't exist at scale. You have to actually be healthier, and you have to have a clear mind so that you can make really good decisions. And that, I think, is a big part of coaching. It's not just the business stuff. It's actually like, am I eating right? Am I sleeping right? And that's a component of Dan's program too.
And did you find, so you started taking care of yourself better after this, basically?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a journey to do it. I'm, in no way where I want to be, but I'm a little closer to it.
And do you find it gives you, because you're taking care of yourself on a personal level more, you're better CEO and better leader?
I think so, for sure. Like, I mean, even, substance abuse is huge among entrepreneurs and founders because
Uh-huh.
you're
Yeah.
depressed, stressed pretty much at all times
And burned out. Yeah.
and burnt out. So like drugs, alcohol, all that stuff becomes habitual, right? And so, even just drinking to take the stress off and like have a go on benders, like the next day, if it's a weekday and you've got to operate a team, you're just useless. So it's something that you can't, you have to figure out. And it's something that I'm working on getting better, getting a better handle on for sure.
Got it. So I have the following question for you. What do you think you would do differently right now if you start Proposify? Since you have many years of experience, you went through the startup stage. Right now, you're scaling the company, doing a multi-million-dollar revenue. Are there certain things you would do differently right now since you have kind of all the years of experience looking backwards?
I believe that you can't overinvest in product. So one of the things that made it really difficult was that we had literally one developer and myself working on product for 17 months, actually beyond 17 months, because we didn't even hire a second or third or fourth product person until after that. And I think it's actually one of the fastest ways to hit product market fit is just to be able to iterate faster, learn faster, and ultimately ship product that customers want. So I think if I was to do it over again and I had validated the idea and I had made sure there was a market and we were solving a real pain, once I kind of felt comfortable with that, I would do whatever's in my power, raise money, put my own money in, find it somehow, and just build like a 10-person product team. Because ultimately you're going to get product out the door faster than if you just, do the work of like what one person can do in a week. If you can multiply that by 5 or 10, you're just going to get a product out the door, within a couple months that it would take one developer a year.
But do you think then someone from beginning would not have the mentality of keeping things lean just to get product market fit and they can kind of scale to quick? What do you think about it?
I mean, it would really have to be the right team, of course. I think
Yeah.
like where we were then, we didn't know how to build a product and dev team. We didn't know like agile. We didn't have good practices around that. So I think if we were, it's more if I was going into another company and starting a new business from scratch, I would take all that knowledge with me. So would
Good.
Jonathan.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But we didn't know that then. So going back in time, yeah, I mean, we couldn't have really done much different than what we did. But I'd say the second round or the third round,
Yeah.
going around, usually find that with a lot of serial entrepreneurs, like, one's who founded Flickr and then it was Slack,
Butterfield. Yeah, Butterfield. I don't remember his name, but Butterfield, yeah.
Or like a Jack Dorsey who, Twitter and then Square. Like, how does one person create $2 billion companies? Like, obviously very smart person, but at the same time, like all the stuff you learn the first time when you're doing a second company, you can now do it 10 times faster because you just have the knowledge that you didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. So just go and apply your existing experience and then you really go quicker.
Yeah. Look like a David Cancel from Drift, he had done a ton of stuff before that at HubSpot and whatnot. So like Drift, I talked to him the other week and they're at like, I don't know, a few hundred employees, like 500 employees or something like that.
They scaled real quick. Yeah. In a few years.
Really quick, and they started the same time we did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's not, of course, not a competition about who can hire the most people, but it's more just a testament to experience counts for a lot when you're trying to scale.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have any favorite reading material? It can be SaaS or it can be also just as an entrepreneur, personal development, reading material, books or blogs, which you really helped you along the way.
I generally try to read a book a month. I don't always hit that goal, but that's generally what I try to do. Tend to focus on business books, although every now and then I'll slip in, a little bit of fiction, although it's not my kind of choice. right now I just started reading $1 Trillion Coach, which just came out. Bill Campbell, who was like an advisor to Steve Jobs and a lot of significant companies and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. So that's kind of what I'm on right now. But yeah, I mean, Heaton Shaw's, a lot of SaaS people will know Heaton Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
He runs a great blog and has a weekly email where basically he'll outline the top posts of the week that relate to product or growth or sales. So I'd recommend people subscribe to his emails. Yeah, that's, generally try to fill my head with as much as I can, but also put it into practice. I think that can be a little bit of a crutch for people, is they do too much consuming and too little. They take the input, but they don't create the output. And that's really how you accelerate your learning faster, is learn what you can and then actually try it. You'll learn way more than if you just consume.
How do you keep this balance of input and output in terms of reading and applying?
I mean, one of those things is blogging and creating content, I think, is really helpful. So it's kind of like, if you're in the practice of reading and learning or listening to podcasts or whatever, however you consume information that's relevant for your business, take that in regularly, but then also try it out. Actually do, just operating your business, you're naturally going to take the things that you're learning and try to apply them. And then as you apply them, you'll learn what worked and what didn't, and then take those lessons and share them with other people. Go on podcasts or create a blog or create a YouTube channel and just share what you're learning, because you're always amazed at how valuable your own content and your own information can be to others.
Mm-hmm. So you're balancing it by basically just creating content for others and also taking in content yourself from many other people.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just like breathing,
Yeah.
Breathe in, breathe out.
I like the analogy.
Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you as well, like the title of your book is How to Build a Business While Getting Punched in the Mouth. We didn't really have time to delve into some of the challenges you went through, and I don't think we have it based on what we have. But what I wanted to ask is, do you think the punches or the challenges which you did have is exactly the reason why you are where you are today? Like, is it because of it, despite of it, that it stopped you? I just wanted to get your feedback on it while we're chatting.
It's hard to know. I know really successful entrepreneurs who, came from a great family, have supportive parents, haven't had any significant deaths or traumas in their life. Like they have it fairly easy, and they're great entrepreneurs. I don't think that you have to have, lived this tragic life in order to be successful. But I also think that if you've had challenges, which most people have, they've, whether it's family or, deaths or financial difficulties, bankruptcy, like most entrepreneurs have some kind of, they're going to get punched in the mouth at some point. And I think the real test is that who will actually keep going and who will give up and say, well, I'm just going to go back to what's safe. I think what you usually find is the ones who end up being successful are the ones that kept going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Who inspires you to be better?
Probably my wife. Mm-hmm. Meeting her has been, she's definitely leveled up my game for sure. Taken better care of myself. She's not in tech, or she's not an entrepreneur actually, but she's just, always teaching me to be a kinder person and a healthier person. From a business standpoint, the people around me for sure, my friends that I work with, and then externally, who I really enjoy listening to Gary Vaynerchuk. Okay. I like his delivery and his bravado. Yeah, he kind of, every now and then, if I need to get pumped up, I'll listen to Gary V.
Cool. So yeah, Kyle, we are getting close to the end of the show. Where can people find you online? Where can people find your book and Proposify?
Yeah, the book's on Amazon. If people search for that, if they can just get a link to it from my website, which is KyleRacki.com, RACKI. And then they can check out Proposify if they want to take the software for a test spin. It's proposify.com, PROSIFY.com.
I'll put the links in the show notes. Yeah, I'll put all of this in the show notes for people listening in. Yeah, Kyle, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. I know it can be busy, and I can imagine running a SaaS company. So I appreciate you sharing all your insights and your story with us today.
It was my pleasure, Yuli. Thanks for having me on.
All right, likewise. Take care.